Noah woke before sunrise, the soft glow of morning filtering through the curtains of his bedroom, and for a long moment he simply sat on the edge of his bed, breathing deeply as he prepared himself mentally for the journey ahead, a journey he knew would demand everything from him, just like the one he survived before. But this time he wasn't going unprepared. He had spent weeks planning, gathering information, listing down survival strategies, and now as he looked at the large empty suitcase lying open on the floor, he felt a strange mix of excitement, fear, and determination. He began packing slowly and carefully, placing each item with thought and purpose: medical kits, antiseptic sprays, bandages, painkillers, antibiotics, cotton rolls, rope bundles, waterproof bags, satellite tracker, 2 emergency signal flares, water purifying tablets, compact sleeping blankets, steel survival knives, fire starters, energy bars, protein packs, dehydrated meals, weatherproof clothing, spare socks, hand gloves, multi-purpose tools, and compact cookware, every single thing he wished he had during his last survival ordeal. He double-checked each section of his gear, recalling memories of the jungle, remembering the hunger, the danger, the cold nights, and the unpredictable storms that nearly ended him and his team. He refused to go through that level of vulnerability again. By late morning, his bedroom looked like a command center, scattered with equipment that belonged more to an expedition leader than an ordinary man recovering from trauma. As he tightened the straps of his backpack, he heard footsteps behind him, his wife. She stood at the door, her expression soft yet heavy with worry, watching him prepare for another potentially deadly challenge. Noah's heart tightened. He walked to her, held her hand gently, and explained once again why he needed to go back, how everything inside him felt unfinished, how the jungle still called him like an unsolved mystery, how he felt a responsibility to document it, understand it, and face it without fear. His wife listened silently, trying to hide the trembling in her voice as she said she trusted him but feared losing him again, and Noah promised her that this time he wasn't alone, he had friends who were ready, trained, and committed. After a long emotional moment, she finally nodded, whispering that she believed in him. Noah hugged his children tightly, each embrace anchoring him, giving him strength rather than holding him back. He wanted them to see their father as brave, determined, and purposeful, not lost, not scared, not running away from life but running toward it. With his heart steadied, he messaged his 2 closest friends, Ian and Lara, confirming the final meeting time, and within minutes both replied with enthusiasm, saying they were equally prepared. As the afternoon sun warmed the house, Noah zipped up his final bag and stood in the center of the room, breathing deeply. It was happening. Everything was packed, everything was ready. His friends believed in him, his family trusted him, and he believed in himself more than ever. He took one last look at his home, let the calm settle inside his chest, then grabbed his bags and stepped outside, carrying with him not only equipment but the strength of every moment that had shaped him. Today marked the true beginning of a new chapter, a return to the wilderness, but this time with knowledge, intention, and the power of choice. Noha woke before sunrise, his heart drumming with a mix of fear and excitement as he stepped outside to meet his 2 closest friends, Ian and Myra, who were already waiting near the old Jeep he had restored the night before, a rugged 1990 model known for its stubborn engine but unmatched endurance on rough terrains. The chilly morning air carried the smell of dew and petrol as they loaded the last of their supplies, 3 large waterproof duffel bags, 2 heavy backpacks, metal cases filled with survival tools, cans of food, medical kits, batteries, ropes, flares, climbing hooks, and old military-grade torches that Noha had bought from a retired officer, spreading everything out on the ground to double-check nothing essential was missing, because this time they were not going unprepared like before, this time they were going with knowledge, maps, strategies, and hard-earned experience carved into their bodies. Especially Noha, who still carried faint scars on his neck and arms from the brutal Amazon survival months ago. After confirming all gear, they tightened each bag, secured them to the Jeep roof, and finally slammed the doors shut, their breath visible in the cold air as Noha turned the ignition key and the engine coughed loudly but eventually growled awake, vibrating like an old beast ready for war. The road ahead stretched like a long ribbon of uncertainty, yet filled with a strange pull that none of them could resist. They drove through the quiet roads of the city, crossing bridges, passing small cafes preparing their morning fresh bread, and into the countryside where the early light painted the fields gold. Myra, sitting in the back seat, began filming everything on her camera for documentation, every turn, every stop, every laugh, the playlist they decided on, and the nervous conversations they had about what might happen once they entered the Amazon again. After 2 hours of driving, they stopped at a highway rest area where Noha bought breakfast for all, a simple meal of boiled eggs, hot tea, and fresh rolls. They sat on wooden benches talking about their plan, their fears, and the reason they were doing all this, to explore the parts of the jungle that no one had dared to reach, to document strange ruins Noha had glimpsed during his escape, to find answers to the mysterious signals that had appeared on his faulty GPS, and maybe to discover why their plane had lost contact that day months ago. The journey continued, with Ian taking over the wheel while Noha navigated using 3 maps, digital, printed, and one hand-drawn through his memories. They passed small towns, deep forests, and long deserted stretches where only the sound of the wind and rolling tires existed. Sleeping in shifts throughout the ride, the Jeep shook and rattled on harsh terrains but kept moving faithfully, surviving every bump and climb because Noha had spent weeks repairing it. By the second day, their excitement had softened into quiet determination, and their conversations grew deeper, about life, about courage, about what changed inside Noha after living through hunger, storms, wounds, loneliness, and fear. Myra listened carefully, writing notes in a small journal she planned to turn into a book someday. On the third morning, after hundreds of kilometers and countless small stops for fuel, food, and stretching their legs, they finally entered the outskirts of the Amazon basin, where the road narrowed into muddy trails surrounded by towering trees whose branches almost blocked the sunlight. The air grew heavy, warm, and alive with the sounds of thousands of unseen creatures, birds that screeched like whistles, insects humming like vibrating wires, and the distant roar of waterfalls echoing deep. Inside, Noha felt his heartbeat rising not with fear this time but with a strange sense of belonging, as if the jungle remembered him, as if every leaf carried a memory of him running, falling, surviving. By afternoon they drove until the Jeep could go no further. The road had dissolved into thick mud, enormous roots, and dense wilderness, so they pulled over near a large fallen tree trunk, turned off the engine, and stepped outside, staring at the endless ocean of green where their new chapter would begin. They sat together for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of the past and the pull of the unknown future, before taking their backpacks, strapping their belts, checking their water bottles, and preparing to continue the journey on foot. The jungle stood before them like a giant waiting to be challenged, its shadows shifting with hidden dangers, and Noha whispered softly, "We're back," before leading his friends into the thick forest where their real adventure would soon unfold. For the next 3 days, Noha and her 2 friends remained on the road, moving steadily toward the Amazon region as their old 90s Jeep rumbled across highways, villages, and long empty stretches of land. The journey felt endless, but strangely peaceful. Every morning they woke up early, washed their faces at roadside pumps, and packed their small breakfast, bread, boiled eggs, fruit, and steel flasks of tea, before continuing toward the forest. On the first day, they crossed a big valley where fog rolled over the road like slow waves. Noha took pictures, laughing at how the fog made everything look mysterious. By the second day, the smooth highway slowly disappeared, turning into cracked roads with long stretches of silence where only the sound of the engine and distant birds could be heard. They stopped at small darbas and wooden huts, meeting kind strangers who asked them where they were traveling and stared in surprise when Noha said, "Amazon Jungle Adventure." Her friends joked that maybe the locals thought they were crazy, but they enjoyed every little moment, the winding turns, the cold nights inside the Jeep, the smell of forest slowly getting stronger. Sometimes they parked near rivers, sitting on rocks while dipping their feet in cold water and eating their food. They talked about everything, life, dreams, and whether they were ready for the unknown dangers waiting inside the jungle. On the third day, the scenery completely changed. Tall trees appeared on both sides, the temperature dropped, and sunlight filtered through the thick branches like golden stripes. The road turned muddy and uneven, forcing them to drive slowly as insects buzzed around. And the sounds of wild animals echoed faintly from far away. Noha looked out of the window with a mix of fear and excitement. This was no longer just a road trip, this was the entrance to a new world. Their jeep stopped at a small wooden checkpoint, the last human-made structure before the deep jungle. The guard warned them about the forest's unpredictable weather, wild animals, and the fact that people often get lost. Noha listened carefully, her heart beating fast but determined. As the sun began to set on the third evening, they finally reached the unofficial gateway of the Amazon. The jeep stood still, engine ticking, and all three friends stepped out, staring at the giant wall of trees ahead, dark, silent, enormous, and alive. Noha took a deep breath, tightening her backpack straps. Their journey on the road had ended, but the real adventure was only beginning. The sun had barely risen when Noha and his two friends, Ian and Maria, continued deeper into the vast landscapes leading toward the Amazon, their jeep humming steadily as the road beneath them shifted from smooth asphalt to patches of gravel and uneven earth, each mile pulling them further away from civilization and closer to the raw, untamed world they had set out to explore. The air grew warmer, thicker, and more humid as they progressed, carrying the smell of wet soil and distant vegetation. And though the journey had been long, 3 exhausting days of continuous travel filled with quick roadside meals, laughter, silence, and moments of reflection, there was something different about this morning, something in the energy of the air that told Noha they were crossing from the world they knew into a world that existed entirely on its own terms, untouched and unbothered by human presence. Maria leaned forward from the back seat, her fingers brushing the dusty map spread across her knees as she said, "We're getting closer to the first jungle checkpoint, only a few hours more," her voice steady but carrying a hint of nervous excitement, while Ian, who was driving, nodded but kept his eyes on the narrowing road, the trees on both sides growing taller and leaning closer, their branches forming a shadowy canopy that filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns that danced across the jeep's dashboard. Noha sat in the passenger seat with his notebook open on his lap, flipping through the pages he had written during the first journey, sketches of strange symbols, descriptions of unusual creatures, the supernatural encounters that still haunted him, and the memories of moments he could barely believe had happened, yet here he was again, returning to the jungle that had nearly destroyed him, driven by the same pull he couldn't explain but could no longer ignore, the same force that had whispered to him in his dreams and left him restless until he had decided to return with full preparation and trusted companions. The road dipped suddenly and the jeep jolted, forcing the 3 of them to cling to whatever they could grab, and Ian muttered, "This terrain is getting ridiculous," but Noha only smiled, because he recognized the feeling of entering dangerous land. A place that didn't welcome anyone easily. An hour later, after climbing slopes and crossing old, rickety wooden bridges, they finally reached a rest point near a secluded stream, where they stepped out to stretch their legs and breathe air that smelled intensely of earth and water, a reminder of the jungle's raw purity. Maria collected pebbles along the water's edge, fascinated by their shapes, while Ian washed his face in the cold stream, letting out a relieved sigh, but Noha walked farther away, toward a cluster of towering trees where the shadows felt unnaturally still. He stood quietly, listening, sensing the energy around him shift, as if the forest recognized him, remembered him, and was waiting. He didn't say anything to his friends, not wanting to worry them yet, but a strange heaviness settled in his chest, one he tried to shake off as they packed up and resumed their journey. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts of the jungle checkpoint, a place made of old wooden structures, guarded by men who looked like they had spent their entire lives fighting the jungle rather than living beside it, and one of the guards stepped forward, eyeing them with suspicion before asking why they were entering an area known for disappearances, sudden storms, and unexplained events. Noha stepped forward, his voice calm and confident as he explained that they were explorers, researchers documenting unknown terrains. And though the guard clearly didn't believe everything, he reluctantly let them through after warning them, "The deeper you go, the less the forest behaves like a forest," words that stayed with Noha as the jeep rolled past the checkpoint and into a part of the world where daylight felt dimmer, the air thicker, the sounds louder yet strangely distant. The deeper they went, the more the trees multiplied, rising like ancient guardians, their roots twisting like serpents across the ground, and Maria whispered, "It feels like they're watching us," and though Ian laughed it off, Noha felt the same sensation creeping up his spine. Soon the road disappeared entirely, swallowed by mud, moss, and fallen branches, forcing them to park the jeep and continue the rest of the journey on foot, each of them carrying heavy backpacks filled with gear, food, ropes, small tools, and medical kits, everything they needed for survival, and hopefully, for answers, as they walked in single file through the overgrown forest floor. The light dimmed even though the sun was still up, replaced by a soft green glow filtering through layers of leaves overhead, and strange sounds echoed from deep within the forest, not threatening but unfamiliar, reminding them that they were entering territory where humans were foreign, insignificant, and unwelcome. Noha led the way, retracing steps he had taken months earlier, though the landscape looked different now, more alive, more aware, as if the jungle itself had shifted since his last visit, and every few minutes he would stop, look around, and adjust his direction, trying to follow instinct more than memory. By the time evening approached, they reached a small clearing where they decided to set up base for the night, a patch of land surrounded by thick trees dripping with vines, and the moment they stopped walking, the silence hit them, heavy and unnatural, as if the forest were holding its breath. Ian started unpacking while Maria set up a portable light, but Noha stood still again, staring into the darkness between the trees, feeling something familiar, an energy, a presence he had once felt, and though he didn't tell his friends yet, he knew one thing for certain: the jungle remembered him, and whatever had started in his first journey was far from over. In the fading evening light, Noha, Ian, and Maria stepped deeper into the jungle, their clothes damp from the humidity and their shoulders heavy with backpacks. As the last hints of civilization disappeared behind them, the narrow trail gradually transformed into a wild maze of twisted roots, giant ferns, and towering trees whose branches intertwined above them like an enormous cathedral ceiling, shutting out the sky in patches and replacing the sun with a thick green glow that felt both magical and suffocating. They had been walking for hours since exiting the jeep, and the air now carried the unmistakable roar of nighttime life, chirping insects, distant animal calls, and the soft rustling of unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth, which wrapped around them and created a constant reminder that this forest was alive, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Noha led the group with determination carved into his tired face, though flashes of anxiety sparked through his mind as he remembered what had happened the last time he walked through a jungle like this: the crashing plane, the wounded survivors, the endless struggle for food, the nights when he wasn't sure if he would ever see his family again. He breathed deeply, fought the memories down, and reminded himself that this journey was different. This time he was prepared, stronger, and not fighting for survival but for answers and closure. Ian walked behind him, occasionally wiping sweat from his forehead and adjusting the straps of his backpack, complaining softly under his breath about the heat but still refusing to slow down. He kept glancing at the compass and GPS tracker hanging from his belt, though both behaved strangely inside the dense forest, causing the tracker's screen to flicker and lose signal every few minutes. Maria followed silently, her eyes constantly observing the environment with a curiosity that made her forget how physically exhausting this trek was. She paused at every odd plant, ancient looking branch, or unfamiliar footprint, her fingers brushing lightly over leaves and her breath catching in fascination whenever she saw something unusual. And Noha often had to whisper, "Maria, stay focused, jungle isn't safe," to pull her back to the moment. When the sun finally dipped below the tree line, the forest transitioned almost instantly into night, forcing them to stop walking and set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by thick vines and tall, narrow trees that swayed in the soft wind like silent guardians. Noha placed a portable lamp in the center, its warm glow pushing back the darkness just enough for them to work. Ian unpacked a small stove and began heating water while Maria arranged their sleeping mats, carefully shaking off insects and clearing the ground of leaves and stones. But even with the lamp's glow, the shadows around them felt too deep, too alive, as if something unseen was always watching. The three sat in a triangle, their faces half illuminated and half swallowed by darkness, drinking warm tea from metal cups while the sounds of the jungle grew louder, low growls, long bird calls, rustling branches, and each one pretended not to hear the noises that sent chills down their spine. After eating a simple meal of dried fruits and energy bars, Noha opened his old notebook, the one he had carried during his first ordeal in the Amazon and the one he now used to compare changes in the landscape. He flipped through pages filled with shaky handwriting, sketches of broken trees, maps of survival routes, names of lost friends, and moments he wished he could forget. Maria leaned close, her voice soft as she whispered, "Does it feel the same as before?" And Noha paused, his jaw tightening, before nodding slowly. "Everything smells the same, looks the same, even the air feels the same," he replied, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. Ian, trying to lighten the mood, joked that at least this time they had a working stove and weren't eating burned lizard meat like Noha had in his survival story, but even his laughter sounded thin and forced. As night deepened, the forest became darker and the fog thickened, creating a glowing mist around their lamp, and each of them lowered their voices subconsciously, feeling the weight of the wilderness pressing in from all sides. Noha eventually stood, grabbing a small flashlight and scanning the perimeter. The light cut through the mist and revealed nothing but trees, vines, and shadows, yet his instinct screamed that something was different about this part of the forest, an unnatural stillness beneath the noise, as if something large was moving somewhere far beyond the trees, circling them silently. They zipped into their tents, though none of them truly slept. Ian tossed and turned, Maria lay awake listening to the rhythmic thumping of her own heartbeat, and Noha stared at the tent ceiling, memories of his old survival days flooding back. Hours passed until suddenly, crack, the sound of a branch breaking echoed through the forest, loud enough to snap them into instant alertness. Noha sat up first, his breath frozen, listening as leaves rustled softly in the distance. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal scavenging food. This sound had weight, heavy and deliberate, like footsteps pressing slowly into the ground. Ian unzipped his tent slightly and peeked outside, whispering shakily, "Something is out there." Maria clutched her sleeping bag, trying not to panic, while Noha grabbed his hunting knife and flashlight. For a moment, complete silence filled the clearing, and even the insects went quiet before a deep growl, low, long, and close, vibrated through the earth beneath them and made the hair rise on their arms. Noha stepped out of his tent, sweat forming instantly on his forehead as he scanned the shadows again, but saw nothing except fog drifting between trees. The growl faded, replaced by the distant call of a night bird, and the forest returned to its unsettling normal. Noha exhaled shakily, realizing this journey would not be peaceful or predictable. Whatever awaited them deeper in the Amazon, it was watching, waiting, testing their courage. And as he crawled back into his tent, gripping his knife tightly, he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, we step even deeper, no turning back now."